Hello and welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast with Ashish. And I was going to say virtual coffee with Ashish, but I'm trying to change that theme now because I need to find my cup today, which has been a bit of a struggle. But today's topic is governance in cloud using IaC or infrastructure as code. And I have Ohad here who's waking up really late for me at his hour. And I'll let him explain why and how. But as always, if you are watching this from YouTube, feel free to subscribe and like. We make videos like this every week where we interview people on cloud security topics. And if you are watching this or listening to this on another platform, feel free to subscribe and leave a review. A 5-star review would be awesome, as you guys have been commenting already on different DMs. It really helps us take the podcast to the next level as well. All right, so without further ado, let me bring the man of the hour. Hey, Ohad, welcome to the show.
Yes, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming on. And it's pretty awesome to have people stay awake late for us. So what time is it for you at the moment?
It's actually 1 a.m. I hope my kids would not wake up during the
It's 1
conversation.
a.m. Oh my God, dude. Thank you so much for staying awake for me. Like you've got people coming in already. Hey, Vinny, thanks for coming in, man. Morning. I think I forgot one part. Let me do this because I forgot the music part. Let me just redo this again. Let's just pretend this never happened. It's like,
Who are you? I don't know you.
yeah, you don't know me. I'm gonna bring you back 1 second. Sorry, folks. There you go. That's the. There you go.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah, now we feel happy. I'm like, oh my God, I got so excited that I did not give you a music. And I'm like, oh my God. But it's a tradition here. So I hope you have your cup here, man.
I told you it's very late, so I just brought
Yeah, and I
water.
appreciate that. Cheers.
Yes.
I just appreciate the fact that you've been awake for us, man. I think that's pretty much what I was, I guess that's value for me right there.
My
So
pleasure.
I'm going to ask the obvious question that a lot of people may be asking. So I guess a little bit about yourself. Where and how, who is Ohad, and how did you, I guess, reach where you are today in terms of professional life?
Okay. So I'm Ohad Maislish, co-founder and CEO of infrastructure as code startup named N0. And I'm 39, father of 2 kids, and my background is technical. From a young age, I started programming, went to university, worked for Microsoft, and then continued working for several other places. And N0 is my second startup and all in all third company. In between those 2 startups, I had a company focused on DevOps cloud infrastructure. Then I saw the huge shift to infrastructure as code and decided it's a good idea probably to do a startup. It feels like there is a gap like between Git and GitHub. So same goes here. Infrastructure as code is a technical framework, and we're focusing on the next level.
So to your point, for people who, I always ask this question and I always get a different response. So I'm curious to know from your side, what does cloud security mean for you?
Wow, it's such a big question, and for me, it's everything about. I focus on infrastructure as code, and infrastructure as code totally changes cloud security, in my honest opinion, because you no longer just have the cloud resources. You now have this hybrid creature of both cloud resources and Git repo with code. Let's say Terraform. So it needs always to be synced, no drifts. So the basic question about cloud security is who has access to the cloud account. So 5 years ago, before infrastructure as code, you gave direct access to people to do certain operations on the cloud. But now with infrastructure as code, you don't want drift. So you give everybody just read access, but you give this one special user, this robot, full access to execute the code. So how you manage permissions, how you manage policies, how you define guardrails, everything changes because you need to define those entities on this hybrid or 2-headed creature, which is both cloud resources and code. So again, infrastructure as code totally changes operations and security.
So I've seen a few of your interviews, and there is this whole concept of third generation of Oh well, let me rephrase. Third data center revolution, as you guys call it, as you've called it.
So,
What is the third revolution? I guess third data center revolution. What is it for people who don't know?
okay, yeah, so we often talk about the third data center revolution or the third cloud revolution. If we go back 20 years ago, for the older people that are that are joining, so
Yeah,
not sure if you
I'm
know,
gonna
like
hide away as you say older people. Like, go on.
so not sure if you know, but like up until 20 years ago, there was no cloud and there was just physical servers, like
Yeah,
bare metal that you
that's
install
right.
operating systems directly on the bare metal, usually Linux. But you had a room full of servers with Dell, HP, IBM, like boxes that you have in a room. And then came VMware and created the first revolution, which is virtualization. And that totally changed how you operate those servers with another layer of virtualization and consolidation, much better service for your customers. You can upgrade memory or CPU of a virtual machine without any downtime, zero downtime. You just move it to another physical server and nobody knows. So that was the major first revolution. The second, obviously, is about 10 years ago with AWS and the other cloud vendors, that you stop having those servers in your room with air conditioners, and instead you pay with credit card to this vendor called AWS, later Azure and GCP and others, and you pay as you go for different services. And by clicking buttons, you click button to create an EC2 instance. Later, GKE at Google and EKS and AKS came later for your own managed Kubernetes cluster, serverless Lambda, whatever you need, just click a button, and within a minute you get a resource. But now, excuse me, now nobody's clicking those buttons anymore, but instead engineers are writing, maintaining, and something executes that code, like Terraform, Pulumi, CloudFormation. So that's the third revolution. It's the cloud code infrastructure as code revolution that changes everything in operations and security.
Interesting. So the use of IaC is considered revolutionary in cloud world, according to you. And any particular reason why? Is it because the automation umbrella comes with it, or?
It's again the new thing to manage combines both code and cloud resources. Okay, so you need to make
Interesting.
sure that your code is secured, that your code operates as it should, and with cost. Maybe you
Oh,
just change some code and then it's huge cost implication. It wasn't like that before that, because usually your code was all about your application. Now it's about your infrastructure. So it's very dangerous to change that code. So you need a lot of governance. We see that customers always talk about they want better visibility, predictability, and governance when it comes to infrastructure as code deployments.
interesting. So would you say, I guess the whole, so the word I'm looking for is more template driven. Like IaC kind of helps you do that. You define what you want as an infrastructure. You define what you want as policy, and like you basically you know exactly what you're getting, instead of, to your point, credit card. I have no idea how many servers Ohad created. Instead, at least I have some visibility of it. Is that
Yes,
why revolutionary?
it's repeatable, it's predictable, it's auditable, and
Yeah.
basically it's unscalable without it, because there are two other shifts that happened in the last few years. You obviously know the shift from monolith to microservices, the shift
Yeah.
to cloud native. So applications became much more complicated, and it's just impossible anymore to continue clicking those buttons and understand what you're doing. You cannot manage that in scale. So that's why engineers started writing, maintaining that code, and
Yeah.
currently Terraform is the de facto standard to do it. But there are others.
They are right. And for people who may not know what governance in cloud, because I feel like there are a couple of other aspects of governance, not just, so there's finance, there's security, but can you know what does governance in cloud using IaC mean for you? Considering that's the topic.
Sure. So first of all, it's all about developers. Okay, so you want to empower the developers as much as you can, But if you just give them full access, they can damage themselves. Okay, they can just maybe test the wrong things. They can manage their colleagues and interfere with the environments of their colleagues. And the most important, they can damage the service that their customers get if they deploy the wrong thing to production. Okay, so that's governance to protect me from myself, to protect me from my colleagues, or to protect my colleagues from myself, and to protect my customers and basically my organization from my my mistakes. So how can I empower them with maximum freedom, but with low risk?
Maximum freedom with low risk. So open policy, but how do you do this though? Because I'm obviously IaC one option. Is this, like, how does this scale? I think I'm curious to hear your side of the story as well. So you're allowing to have freedom, minimizing risk. So is infrastructure as code the only I guess a way to achieve this, or are there, like, I'm sure there are other ways as well, but to your point, governance is that, like, basically having the ability for developers to go that extra mile without feeling restricted?
I think infrastructure as code is more a technical layer. Okay, like let's say Git for source control, it's technical layer, and the governance, it's another layer on top of that. Okay, so I think Git is a great example, because in Git you don't have the concept of pull request. That's a concept in GitHub or GitLab, the concept of pull request. In pull request, you have both freedom. Developers can change their code in a branch, in a pull request. But before they merge, they prepare a pull request, and a colleague needs to approve it. Okay, so you have a workflow how to approve a change. So you have this governance for changing code. So same goes here for changing cloud resources. What is the pull request of changing cloud resources? Because if you just have a GitHub pull request, you just see the change in code, but you don't see the effect. What's going to happen if I merge it? So you want to perform a dry run, what's called a plan, and to make sure this plan is legit. Okay, so then you have automatic validations on that plan. Worth mentioning OPA, Open Policy Agent, that is a very powerful mechanism that goes over your code and your state plan to make sure that what you're about to deploy complies with the rules that you defined in Open Policy Agent. So that's how policy as code affects infrastructure as code to get the governance that you need.
That's an interesting one, because I've already explored the thing why a lot of solutions have become developer first, and keen to know, I guess N0's, you mentioned this earlier as well, that it's developers being able to go at speed without restrictions while minimizing the risk. So why a developer first solution? So I would think this is like I don't know, like a governance body in the company, security, finance, legal, those guys, right? Like, why developer first?
It's always about developers. Those are the people.
I'm so glad you're saying this, because that's why this question was appropriate. Yeah, it's always about developers. They're the ones making money. Sorry, I'll jump back to you.
They're the one making money, maybe, but they're the one that making the tough decisions. Okay, they are the one that need to decide which architecture to use, which services. I remember for the first time seeing GKE in Google, and before EKS and AKS. Okay, so GKE was the first managed Kubernetes among those three big vendors.
Yeah.
And then a lot of developers told their organizations, okay, it's time to use GCP. Okay, moved from AWS to GCP, moved from Azure to GCP. So developers can make huge decisions. So you need to put the right tools in the hands of developers. I think it started, I don't know, like 12 years ago with APM, like AppDynamics, New Relic, later on Datadog, that you want to make sure developers know about the performance and latency of their application. But then it moved to security, like with Snyk, and shifting left security. And I think And Zero is doing the same to cloud deployments based on infrastructure as code, how we shift left to developers to give them the right tools to make sure they can work as fast as they can while being secure.
Interesting. I kind of realized what I did with that statement. So I guess when I was saying good developers are making money, I meant developers are the ones who are making money for the business. I'm sure they're individually making money as well. I meant more in terms of like when you look at a business and people who are generating money, apart from the sales guys and girls bringing in more sales, is usually the developers who are building the features that get sold, that the salesperson can go out and sell. So without that, I guess technically there is nothing to sell.
Absolutely. Each company eventually has its competition. Okay. And how you beat your competition with a better product. Okay. So who builds that product? It's not being built by magic. You need great developers. And I think, by the way, Tesla is a great example of how they beat other car manufacturers that have been existed for many years. But the Tesla product is much better than so many other products. And I hope I will not make a lot of people angry at me, but I think what Steve Jobs and iPhone did 15 years ago is that they introduced a much better smartphone or phone than all others. And then Apple became huge again because they had the best product. It's about marketing as well and brand and the ecosystem and the API for developers. But the basic thing is the device that the product that people want to use.
Yeah, man, well said. And I 100% agree with you on. I'm an Apple fanboy as well, which is why totally in the Steve Jobs bandwagon. I'm sure Android is the same as well, but we all know who came first. So I'm gonna drop that ball there and move on before people send angry comments in here. So like, we are Android users. Stop disrespecting Android. I do not mean a disrespect to Android, but
I have Android.
I thought you and I could be friends, okay. But I'm gonna hold off on that now. So I'm glad you mentioned this. So developer first definitely makes sense, but how is governance and because I don't normally see people relate governance and developers together, and so why do you think so? Why in this layer? Because why not say security? And I think that's kind of where I was coming from. I love the aspect that you pointed about developer first, because they're the ones who are generating value and money for the company. So 100% for them to go risk free. So and this is kind of where it goes. Is it because IaC is primarily in their land? Is that why that's what's driving governance?
IaC is code. Okay, and code, the people who change code, those are the developers. And this code is about the infrastructure. Okay, and an organization, although developers are super important, an organization, it's not just, it's not just the developers. You need to make sure that no damage is being done. And if it's so easy to change the infrastructure now, again, you do a git push, that's it.
Yep.
Well, an organization cannot allow that every git push will be automatically deployed. Okay, so it's not just to execute that code. It's to build a mechanism that makes sense for an organization to define which developer can execute which code under which cloud account, associated with which cloud account. And it's what kind of policies I set up. Okay, is it okay to create 20 new EC2 instances, EC2 like huge instances, or maybe it's too expensive? Is it okay to define this resource outside of the VPC? Or maybe it's not supposed to be like that. Is it okay to execute it automatically, or I want a colleague to take a look and approve those changes is it okay to cross that budget? So, it's now more than just code. It's how I operate in an organization in a way that makes sense to move forward.
So does IaC take away the responsibility of having some kind of an asset management then? I'm just trying to think, because you know how you mentioned everything is code, we are on GitHub, totally get that. All supportive of that as well. But where does this kind of get, how do I put this? I feel like there'll be a lot of different kinds of code in an organization. There'll be Terraform code, there'll be CloudFormation, there'll be something else. So is governance around that more bringing that all up one layer so you could see what technology is being used and where it's being deployed? Or is it like what I guess, do you get a drift from where I'm going with this? Because I feel like the governance is almost like, yes, IaC is great, helps me automate. I've automated how a developer can deploy, I guess, a infrastructure as code into my organization. But as a security person listening to this, I'm like, that's very interesting. So I may have Terraform, CloudFormation, IaC. Is there like a layer on top that sits for this, out of curiosity, that you have seen?
And zero. That's exactly.
Oh, I did not intend to do there, but that was the problem. So I loved what you did. You basically made me go down the path where suddenly it's like, I wonder what's the problem here. And they're like, there you go. It actually reminded me of someone else as well, and who happens to be the sponsor of the show, the sponsor of the season, I guess, this year. Let me one second. I think Nathan does this really well. So let me just put that in, because he solves the guys at Exonius are the sponsors of the season as well. And the asset management question reminded me of those guys. So let me just quickly bring in that one thing over here. 1 second.
Hey, Ashish and Cloud Security Podcast listeners. Thanks for giving Exonius the opportunity to sponsor the show. Exonius does exactly 3 things. By connecting to existing data sources, Exonius gives customers a comprehensive asset inventory, both cloud and on-prem. It then uncovers security gaps, and finally, it automatically validates and enforces policies. Thanks again, and check us out at exonius.com.
Awesome. And Nathan does that really well. So I was like, oh, I wonder if this is a good segue to that as well. But so I'm glad I was able to kind of spring up the problem as to, hey, I'm a security person, or I'm a person who considers, because I feel like the reason I brought the Exonius piece, and they are sponsors, I love those people, but the fact that I love about the space we are in is that I have, as a CISO, I have a asset management challenge. I have a challenge where I've got IaC now being developed, to your point about the third data center revolution. And I'm looking at this across the board and going, okay, I have IaC with Terraform, IaC with CloudFormation. Everyone seems to be coming to me and telling me I'm doing IaC, but I don't know that it's like that layer. So I'm glad we could come up to that thing. But in saying that, actually, there's a question here from one of our regular listeners and a previous guest as well, Darpan. Can even take a step further by governing what services can even be used within the CSP and by whom. Do you have any comments on this? Then take that one.
Can even take a step further by governing what services can even be used.
So like IaC using a service in the cloud service provider. I think that's where he's going with this.
But I'm not sure what is used. Use is deployed, or the customer of the customer is using that.
Oh no, so I think it's more the you know how governance in IaC we're talking about? Governance in IaC using cloud native services. I guess that's kind of where he's going with. But I'll let him clarify. But is it, because I would have thought like the CloudFormation template example that we mentioned, people can do IaC with CloudFormation template. They don't really have to, I guess, use Terraform if they're just in AWS. So yeah, they can. What are your thoughts on governance using cloud native services? I guess that's kind of where it's coming from.
Like CloudFormation, for example.
Like CloudFormation, for example, yeah.
Okay, again, at the end, you need to build workflows. The CloudFormation language, by the way, like ARM templates in Azure, is a single vendor infrastructure as code framework that if you execute that code, the resources are being provisioned. But then again, you need to, when you want to run
Great.
fast.
Sorry, I got that. So thanks, David, and thanks, Darpan, for clarifying it. I think it was more of a comment rather than a question. I misunderstood. So David just mentioned he's saying limiting the type of governance using limiting the type of consumption of services in cloud. So it
For
was more of a
example,
comment to the previous thought about governance and developers. I hope I got that right. Thanks, David. Thanks, Darpan. So, but I guess what are your thoughts on that then? I guess do you want to add something more to this?
no, I
Using
think
cloud native services to limit the type of consumption that's being taken place in the cloud service provider.
Again, sometimes you don't want different types of services being provisioned. You want to control. Maybe it's about cost, maybe it's about security, maybe it's about standards, maybe it's about compliance, licenses. I don't know. It really depends what you want to enforce. Okay, each organization has its own regulation, its own requirements. So if you want, you sometimes cannot just tell developers, okay, develop whatever you want and provision it. So instead of limiting the clicks they can do in the cloud vendor, you now need to take it and associate it with code. Okay, like what kind of code can be executed and on which cloud account? Maybe on the same code can be executed on one cloud account, but cannot be executed on a different cloud account. Okay, so it's not just I can execute that code. Maybe I need to associate what I can run on which cloud account, under which variables, values, policies. It's all a matter of settings that you need to define to make sure you're not doing any harm.
Interesting. Then great answer again. Thanks for sharing that as well, and thanks for the question, Darpan. And sorry, the comment, Darpan. I just kept thinking question again. I find it fascinating that now we have landed on we have a problem with IaC, different types of IaC challenges that come across in an organization. I wonder, in your opinion, as you are listening to this, you may be a startup, you may be a big enterprise or a small to medium-sized business. How does it play a role as you go from a startup to an enterprise? So I'll be keen to know from you, the IaC side of things. Can they start IaC as a startup and that's a good foundation, or it doesn't make sense? Like, I mean, I'll let you answer it however you want, but I'm just curious to know in terms of if I'm listening to this and I'm different company profiles, how would this kind of step-by-step go from a startup to an enterprise, and maybe some challenges that they would face as they go through this that you might have seen?
So let's talk about the journey. Okay, so the journey of the customers of implementing infrastructure as code always start with the first resource, the first thing that you move from manual clicks to code. And maybe the new startups, start fresh, start clean, and never have a cloud resources that was deployed manually. Maybe the only thing they did is to provision or to create a new cloud account, and from there just executed code. Okay, so as I mentioned, the third evolution. So maybe 15 years ago there was another question of, okay, I already have those physical servers in my server room. How do I migrate to the cloud? Okay, and then what I do with those old boxes? I do not need them anymore after 2 years of just provisioning to the cloud. So I think the same goes here. Probably most of the listeners today already have cloud resources that have been deployed manually by somebody clicking a button, and they still didn't build it from scratch, everything from code. So it's a migration. And I believe most of the listeners already have one or more infrastructure as code framework in their organization, probably Terraform, but again, other options as well. And as we all evolve and progress, they see more and more provisioning of the new type of code execution and less manual clicks by a human. So I guess in 2, 3, 5 years, 99 or 100% of the cloud resources in that organizations will be deployed from code. Okay, so that's the journey, and it really depends not just about the type of the company, but the architecture, how old school kind of things. They have their legacy and how their migration looks like. But the direction is clear. No more clicking buttons, moving to code. Currently Terraform, Pulumi. I think we still didn't mention the word Pulumi, which is also interesting to talk about. And that's the new way to operate in cloud.
Interesting. So do you see the IaC, for lack of a better word, revolution become a standard across the board
Absolutely.
for anyone doing cloud deployment?
Absolutely. I see no way to avoid it. Again, with the shift to microservices and cloud native, applications became too complicated to continue clicking those buttons anymore. Just too many types of services, too many small entities. So you have many small entities of different types that you need to manage and you want to run fast. And again, it's like talking with somebody 15 years ago, will everybody move to the cloud, or will I use with the physical servers and maybe install the OS directly on the bare metal? So no, everybody moved to virtualization and to the cloud. Even VMware customers are now often hybrid cloud, so they have both their on-prem VMware and their external AWS or others. So they use a hybrid mode. So the same clearly. It's not just me. Talk with any analyst or any infrastructure, DevOps, cloud platform, cloud operation engineer, same title, different title, but same day job. Eventually, those people do is that they understand how to deploy to the cloud in the best way that makes sense for the developer and for the organization, and it's moving to the cloud. The question is not if infrastructure as code is happening. I think the question is which infrastructure as code framework should I choose? If I'm in AWS, should I go with CloudFormation, as you mentioned earlier, or Terraform, or Pulumi? And then the question is, okay, I have infrastructure as code in my Git repo. So this is my Git. What is my GitHub? Is it Terraform Cloud, or is it Env0? I think I know the answer.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I was going to ask, because that comes across to me as, well, last week when we had Kelsey, we were talking about this again over there, how a lot of organizations, and this is something that I've seen, I hear a lot of, where it's becoming a spaghetti of different kinds of framework. And like, so I would have thought the solution would be kind of like what Darpan mentioned earlier, where you basically know what you're putting in, and infrastructure is probably one way of doing it, where you have some code written in which allows you, okay, you can only use CloudFormation. I'm just making up an example there, but it could be anything else. I would have thought that things like this are more complicated when you are looking at multiple technologies across the board. So one of the challenges, if I'm looking at IaC in my organization, no matter how big or small, would that be the different frameworks that would be used? So is that a challenge that you see to the developers that you're talking to or the companies that you're talking to? And what other challenges do you see in this space as people who are trying to make the decision for, oh, okay, so now you want to do IaC, great, but we already have Terraform that's being used for so long, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? I hope I made the question a bit more clearer.
Yeah, so usually companies know or make official decisions on what framework to use. But again, eventually developers have the freedom to have initiatives. And that's when they start introducing new technologies. So maybe your organization already has a lot of Terraform, but some developers in some groups decide that this new project they're going to do in Pulumi. Okay, and nobody basically can tell them, no, you have to do it in Terraform. It's not a black and white kind of thing. So sometimes you will have this enforcement, and they will tell the developers, no, you cannot use Pulumi. We already use Terraform, so you must keep using Terraform. But the truth is that eventually developers are the decision makers for the technologies, the architecture, and that's why things naturally evolve and you see different, like you have multi-cloud organizations. Now I have multi-cloud. You don't have just AWS, for example. You have both AWS and Azure being used in a customer. How did it? When did it start? Like someday it happened when somebody decided, okay, I'm now going to use a second cloud provider for this thing, and I have a good enough reason, and nobody can stop me. So same goes here with the multiple frameworks. There's going to be a variety of frameworks. We already see that. I think it's too early to tell who is going to win. The current winner is Terraform, but what's going to happen in 3 years, in 5 years? Let's see.
Right. Well, so in terms of IaC, it's Terraform. Seems like Kubernetes is taking the other side of the battle, where it's the platform piece where, as I'm going to quote Kelsey and other people as well, becoming more cloud native as well. So to add on to this, if we know, okay, we've defined it, we understand that there would be multiple frameworks that would be used as well. How it's more a cultural challenge as well then? So it's not just I think where we started before, it's not a technology challenge. It's also a cultural challenge as well, where people just accept the fact that, yep, this is happening. So we need to find creative ways to still allow for developers to be able to continue developing without being blockers. And how do you do that? So do you see cultural shift as a challenge as well as the company kind of grows?
I think the first challenge, and maybe before I answer that, you said about Kubernetes. Kubernetes is for sure the de facto standard for compute resources. Okay?
Yes.
So nobody is using virtual machines anymore. Obviously, people still use virtual machines, but it's reducing dramatically, and it moved to containers. And the standard to manage containers at scale in a cluster is obviously Kubernetes. So if you want a compute-based resource, Kubernetes is for a few years now the big winner. But moving back to your question, and I already forgot it. Can you remind?
That's okay. So I think the question that I was asking was more, we spoke about that there are different frameworks that are being developed, and Terraform and Kubernetes have kind of come into the play anyways. In terms of I'm drawing a blank as well now. Maybe I'll come back.
I have an excuse. It's 1 a.m. over here. What's your excuse?
I was like, what is my excuse? Like 8:30 in the morning for me, so it's like way too early. I'm gonna skip over to the, without further embarrassing myself. I'm gonna skip to the next question, which is so people who may be listening to this, and I'm going, oh, this IaC thing sounds good, and we were talking about challenges as well. And I feel like IaC is probably different. To your point, you can use Terraform or any other open source tool out there to kind of learn it. Where do you see as a good point for people to kind of start learning about IaC? And also maybe how would they start with, like, is it an easy step to start the governance pieces of IaC for an individual who may be trying to do this for the company?
The governance.
Yes.
So before that, you need to understand infrastructure as code, and you need to write your first maybe Terraform code, provision few instances.
Right.
If you want to talk about governance, so I think there's 2 or 3 types of governance, like how you do governance. So one is to use a solution that manages the role-based access and put things in the right context, like Terraform Cloud or N0. But another thing is to automate the policies. So you have a policy as code. Okay, it's important to understand that the scalable way to do policies for infrastructure as code is with a policy as code engine mechanism. So I strongly recommend of what seems to be the standard, the de facto standard today, to do so with Open Policy Agent. So go into openpolicyagent.org and write your first set of rules. Try to deploy something that is okay, and see that you manage and you have success and you manage to deploy it. But then try to deploy something that is not according to the open policy agent rules that you've defined, and see that it failed, and then take it from there. Because once you have great open policy agent rules and like a variety of rules, and you can trust that, then you can allow a lot of freedom, because you know that those deployments make sense and will not harm your organization.
And is there a developer-friendly way of applying this in the company?
The appliance?
No, sorry, a developer-friendly way of introducing this in the company. If you're not using this at the moment, what's the developer-friendly way that you recommend? Like, talk to them, give them a hug, and say, hopefully this works.
I think communication, the talking piece is always important. Transparency, communication. But I don't think it's this thing is too complicated. I think the cultural thing that is complicated is earlier on the journey, before the governance, is when you maybe revoke direct cloud access from developers. Again, when you move to infrastructure as code, you must make sure there is no drift. And the number one reason for drifts is for people to directly provision cloud resources without changing code. So
right.
The first thing you do in an organization that move to infrastructure as code, the big cultural change is to revoke direct cloud access from developers and just give them read-only access. It's a big and painful and long-lasting process. Sometimes some companies just one day say, okay, forget about direct cloud access. But once you move to that direction, and only deployments are only being done by execution of code in your source control management system like GitHub, then introducing open policy agent as a process should be simple, because it's the same process. Like for the developer, it's the same experience. They change code in GitHub, they change Terraform code in GitHub, but then sometimes this code is being rejected, okay, and they cannot deploy it. But it doesn't. They still do the same things pretty much, okay. They just write code and try to deploy it. So adding governance with policy as code, I don't think it's the biggest cultural change. The biggest cultural change comes before that, when you move to infrastructure as code in general, and you need to revoke that. And what we recommend people that are doing this journey is to do it gradually. Okay, so at the beginning, let's say you just revoke from them the RDS, the database write access, and you force that RDS deployments will be done using code execution, like Terraform execution of the RDS module. And then you take to the next piece, VPC. Okay, you can no longer provision VPC by direct access to the cloud. You can just execute it. Like take the rare cases, and then move to the common case of probably changing your Kubernetes definitions, something that is being done quite often. So that's might be the last thing that you do after each person already saw, okay, how I do things without clicking buttons, without opening ticket, how I do it myself by changing code if I need a slice, like a small infrastructure change. So you can do it all at once, but I think there's going to be backfire from the developers that would not like it. So that's a lot of communication, a lot of transparency, a lot of great tooling to help the developers during this transition, and gradually revoke the cloud credentials.
It's funny, when you mentioned this, reminded me of a couple of big companies doing this already, well, obviously mature and have gone down this path quite deep, where it may come across as, what do you mean revoke access and read-only permissions? But it goes a long way in kind of, to your point, going into that third revolution of cloud, where everything is in GitHub or GitLab or some form of Git, and you have I guess a one source of truth instead of ClickOps, where you have no control. So keen to know, that was a great answer. Keen to know from your side, where do you see this go? As in, is there a fourth revolution, or where is IaC driven governance going?
So I think infrastructure as code, this third revolution, is a fact. And I think the next phase is how I manage the workflows in an organization. And I think what we see a lot of companies do at the moment is that they try to abuse their Jenkins, their CI, their Circle CI, their GitHub Actions in order to manage that. Okay? And Jenkins and Circle CI are not built for infrastructure as code workflows. Okay?
They're not.
No, they're built for technical execution of jobs. Okay,
Right.
They're not built proprietary to understand. Okay, I have now a change in cloud resources. They do not have the concept of cloud resources and policies of cloud resources. They have a general approach on how to do things, and their focus is to take the code and build from that great binaries, like great Docker images, run unit tests, integration test, test coverage, put it in a Docker hub, and make sure that the CI makes sense. But then when you need to do CD, you can do it with Jenkins and execute Terraform apply in your Jenkins. But again, it's not scalable. Once you have 50, 100, 200 different workspaces, you need to manage that at scale. You need to have day two operations on those existing cloud environments. You need to associate resources to a workspace, understand who did what on each entity, manage that in scale. And Jenkins, Circle CI, and GitHub Actions do not suit that next level. And that's why you have Terraform Cloud, that is now the most common solution for managing infrastructure as code deployments in a collaborative kind of way. And that's exactly where also NF0 fits as an alternative. So I'm a strong believer in infrastructure as code, and then to the next level of infrastructure as code management layer. And I think that's the next step, how I'm as a cloud operation team can manage infrastructure as code deployments.
And maybe even multiple cloud environments as well. To your point earlier, where we were talking about multiple languages, multiple frameworks, but then there's also multiple environments that they have to work with as well. So I love the answer, man. I'm going to switch to fun questions now, because I think we've been talking about technology and this for a while. So these are just three simple questions, man. So it shouldn't be that complicated. First one being, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on IaC technology? What do you what's Ohad doing outside of technology?
My hobby is chess. I like playing chess. And since a friend of mine introduced me like 3 years ago, a simple chess application in my mobile phone, my wife keeps complaining that I play chess too much on my phone. But I love playing chess, and I by the way, I really like playing chess with other developers or entrepreneurs or sometimes investors. I really like combining those two things together.
Yeah, I mean, technology people definitely have to, because it's a great strategy game. I used to play a lot as a kid, so I would definitely look forward to a game of chess with you, my friend. I've got a next question. What is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
Something I'm proud of?
Yeah, but it is not on your social media. A lot of people say family and I guess other things, but keen to know from you what something that you're proud of
in my
that is not
life.
on social media?
That happened in my life.
Yeah, something that has happened so far, something you've achieved so far in your life. Maybe, I don't know, could be anything, man. I think it's one of those ones where you're proud of that moment, but you haven't posted about it anywhere yet, and it's already happened. Maybe it's about to happen. You don't know.
So I want to be honest with you. And I think we haven't spoken about it, but for the last 3 years, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm a disabled person and using a wheelchair. My situation became worse in the last few years, and basically in the last 12 years or so, I had 11 surgeries in my right ankle, in my right foot. And I think one of the things I'm proud of is that I keep on fighting until I be able to walk again as a regular person. And I think once you have a personal situation, a big limitation, so on one hand, your life becomes more complicated in a lot of things, but I think in another way, your life becomes much simpler because you understand what is important and what is not. And I think one thing I'm proud of, and I learned it the difficult way, the hard way, is to understand what's important in life and what's not, and focus on the things that really matter and not on the small stupid things.
Yeah, no, very well said, and thank you for sharing that as well, man. I do appreciate you calling it out. That also makes me think of something that I've kind of been thinking about myself since it's early morning and 1 a.m. your time. What's your favorite cuisine? Considering it's that late night, where what would be your favorite cuisine, man?
Food.
Yes, what's your favorite food or cuisine or restaurant?
I'm from Israel, and Israel is a place that in the last 80 years or so, people from all around the world, mostly Jews from all around the world, came to Israel, and we have all kind of cuisines and restaurants over here. But I'll give my dumb answer. I really like Italian food.
Oh, dude, you bigged up so much. I'm like, oh, Jewish culture, Jewish food.
No, I just like
Oh
Italian.
my god.
Good pasta, good pizza. Nothing can beat that.
Oh, I was hoping you would say some kind of like some kind of a Middle Eastern food, maybe, but maybe.
Hummus for sure.
Oh, hummus.
Hummus
Oh
is
my god, yes, I love hummus.
hummus. Nothing can beat hummus.
Oh yes, like that. So wait, but would you add that to the pasta though? Would you add hummus to pasta? Have you tried that?
No. Hummus.
I have tried it. It works in some pastas. I'm just saying. I wanted to see how curious.
I think hummus deserves its own dish. And here you have hummus that you buy in the supermarket. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the hummus that you eat in a restaurant. And
that comes in a plate by itself. It's like this
comes in a plate by itself, and it's hot. It's not cold. It's hot.
It's hot.
It's hot.
Wait, we've been given lukewarm over here in Melbourne, so it's supposed to be hot.
Depends on the type of the hummus. You have two types of hummus. You have the cold one, and you have the hot one, which is called the masabacha or bashawsha. So that's the upgraded kind of hummus. It's based on hummus, and that's what I call hummus, the masabacha. So
there you go. I haven't even.
I highly recommend all of the listeners here to come to Israel or any place in the Middle East and ask not for hummus, ask for masabacha.
Masabaha. All right, I'm gonna take the name for this. I'm gonna need to find this in local version as well. But this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing your story as well. I know it would not have been easy, but I appreciate that. And I'm really glad that I could have you here. We could explain to the problem as well. But for people who may be willing to ask another question and maybe have a follow-up to this, where can they find you?
My Twitter handle is DevOps Ohad, and on our website, ENV0, N0.
InV0, awesome. And this podcast episode is obviously on the podcast platforms as well. For anyone who's still tuning in, all the 50 odd people that are there, appreciate you guys hanging out, and guys and girls hanging out with us. And we will see you in the next one. But if you're here, if you like the video, feel free to like the video if you like the topic we spoke about. But feel free to leave a review or on the podcast platforms, or feel free to subscribe to the channel as well. But until next time. Thanks for coming in, Ohad. It was really awesome. And I'm going to try and find a hummus, like a warm hummus version now.
Thanks,
man. All right. Bye.